Alright, so there's a lot to talk about on the most recent episode, the 12th episode, the penultimate episode of the first season of Stargirl, otherwise titled Stars and Stripe, Part 1. So that being said, welcome back guys to another one of my Stargirl videos. Okay, so the title of this week's episode, the title of next week's episode as well, because this is a part 1, so there's gotta be a part 2. They're both kind of a 2-hour finale, only spread over 2 weeks. The title is basically the title of the comic book, Stars and Stripe, a comic book title that ran for 14 issues, 15 if you include issue number 0, the 0 issue, the introductory issue. Now, Stargirl's first appearance on the pages of the comics was in that 0 issue. Pat Dugan, though, did appear on the pages of the comics decades before the issue came out. That was early 1940s, 1941 or 1942 on the first issue of the Star-Spangled Comics. However, though, Pat Dugan's first appearance, in conjunction with both Stargirl and becoming Stripe rather than Stripe-C, was actually on Stars and Stripe as well. So the answer is yes, everything is falling into place. There's a lot of comic book inspiration on this episode, and I'm expecting the same on next week's episode. I was expecting it anyway, expecting a lot of Easter eggs going into this episode just because of the title, and that came out to be true. As a matter of fact, there's an Easter egg out of a couple of episodes ago that I did not think of correctly, like I thought it was a reference to something completely different, but just realized watching this episode, oh yeah, that was meant to be about that other thing out of these Stars and Stripe comics. Now, I'm not planning on going in the order of events of the episode, but I'm rather gonna clump up certain things in terms of breakdown together because they make sense together. So starting with the first scene, the ISA's plan is to take control of the entire country, but start with 6 states, 100 million people, brainwash their population, and make an army out of them to fight the resistance, because they are expecting resistance out of the other states. But this does go to tell us there is a limit to how much they could amplify the powers of Brainwave in order to gain control out there. While their methods are terrible, the objectives they've got seem to be very noble. The ISA wants to combat global warming. They want to force people to embrace solar and wind power. They want to eliminate discrimination on any basis, sexism, racism, anything ending with ism. So at that point you start thinking, okay, you know what, sign me up, I'm gonna root for these guys. But there is a twist though, they're only gonna try to do that to fully formed minds, so they're gonna try to get control of 100 million people, adults only, not the children, not the younger ones, not the teenagers, so the JSA younger members are actually safe. That's why by the end of the episode, Barbara, Pat, and the Shining Knight are under the spell of Brainwave. Okay, so there's a certain trend we're seeing on these episodes, on this series, a lot of Easter eggs to the comic book counterparts, but at the same time, a lot of it is actually rather done in reverse. So for example, on this episode, we get the confirmation it's not just a feeling that Henry Sr. has, he did indeed absorb the powers of Henry Jr., and this is basically things being done in reverse, because on the pages of the comics, it's the other way around. Brainwave Sr.'s dying as an act of redemption. Right before he dies, he passes down his powers. He transfers them to Henry Jr., and that's how he becomes Brainwave Jr., by the way. Now, in the same spirit of things being done in reverse the other way around as opposed to the pages of the comics, things are being done a little bit in reverse here, because the ones affected on the pages of the comics by the mind control, the plan of the Dragon King, which by the way over there is all about the machine, does not really include Brainwave, they are pretty much the younger generation, not really the adults, not the fully formed minds, but rather the minds that he can shape. The minds that are not yet fully formed, the minds that he can get to easier. So instead of Pat being the victim of the mind control operation, the brainwashing, it's actually Courtney. Courtney is the one who goes bad, and Courtney is the one who attacks Pat, as opposed to what happens on those last few seconds of this episode. But that's just another Easter egg on this episode. One of the bigger Easter eggs that I missed a couple of episodes ago was all about that Snapdragon comment when Courtney first met Dragon King. Like, what are you, Snapdragon? Now when I watched that, I don't know why I fixated on Snapdragon out of Marvel Comics, and I was like, yeah, that's probably a jab at Marvel Comics. But the truth is, watching that machine, watching those satellites, I started thinking, okay, that's completely different. Snapdragon was actually the code for the operation, the code for the project on the pages of the comics. So that makes New America the equivalent of the Snapdragon project on the pages of the comics, only over there it was the project of the Dragon King, the baby of the Dragon King, and not the entire ISA. The ISA were not party to all of this. So yeah, sometimes I'm gonna miss things, I'm gonna forget things, do sue me, because yeah, there's a lot of information to remember over here, and sometimes something is bound to slip. And while we're talking Easter eggs and parallels, the bit about S.T.R.I.P.E and Stargirl in the tunnels, and even the Shining Knight, that is right out of the Stars and Stripe comics, out of which I was expecting, as I mentioned, a lot of inspiration and a lot of Easter eggs and parallels on this episode. Circling back though to that twist, that catch in the ISA's plan, the one I did not really finish talking about, there's a little bit more to it. 25 million people out of the 100 million people are going to resist being brainwashed. And the product of resisting such huge power, brainwaves power is amplified, that's gotta be the death, the shutting down of the brains of all those 25 million people. Now the machine itself that they're using over there, that's right out of the Stars and Stripe comics. However though, the rest of the setup over there, that's pretty much Cerebro out of Marvel Comics, that's taken right out of there. Not hating it, not complaining about it, because I did like how they set it up over there. They added their own touch as well, and that includes, but is not limited to, the way it all functions, so I'm not gonna complain once again. No matter where they got it out of, they did it really well, the execution was great. Moving on though, another thing that we've got on this episode is that conversation between Shiv and Brainwave. There's all the talk about her being a failed experiment in the eyes of both her father and the ISA, and I want to focus on the father part over here, because there is a moment on the pages of the comics that she does fail her father, he does call her a failure, and he does treat her like a failed experiment as well. That entire scene too, from a few episodes back, the drones of the Dragon King capturing Shiv and bringing her to her imprisonment, that's pretty much out of the comics as well. But yeah though, as far as comic book Easter eggs go, we've got a big one on this episode as well. We've got Anaya Bowen with her son Isaac, the actual comic book Fiddler, the one she's trying to protect, a bullied kid, son of yet another Fiddler, well on the series, not in the comic books, but nonetheless, son of yet another Fiddler. I believe what the show is trying to do over here is pretty much set up the next ISA, so they're giving us Isaac at this point to set up for next season. I'm not sure here if news about the Shade is actually confirmed, him being the villain of the next season, being part of the portrait that we keep seeing of the entirety of the ISA, but nonetheless a thought that came to mind is the Shade might actually be the villain of the second season, but not the only villain. I think he might actually fill in for Johnny Sorrow out of the comics. Now, if the current ISA in its current shape and form does get defeated by the end of this season, does get killed as well, like the Dragon King by the end of the Stars and Stripe comics, it is definitely gonna be possible that the Shade does make a comeback only to act as Johnny Sorrow, recruit these new members for this new ISA, and all those members are gonna be the kids of the current members of the ISA. But yeah though, circling back to Anaya, she's killed before the end of the episode at the hands of the Tigress. This unhappy couple seem to be very ill-tempered. I think the failure of this plan might actually rest on them, the ISA's plan. We've got the Tigress attacking Barbara and Courtney upon Jordan's orders. The same happens with Sportsmaster, only he goes to attack Mike and Pat in Pat's workshop. I personally think the entire sequence was pretty solid, with Mike's participation in that fight as well, and Barbara's on the other hand. But what I love the most about those moments is those conversations, those one-liners between Pat on one hand and the Sportsmaster on the other hand. Those scenes were pretty funny. The entire thing though does end in favor of the Dugan-Whitmore household. However though, it also ends in the fascination of Barbara with the staff and with Courtney, and the fascination of Mike with his father. That entire thing about building S.T.R.I.P.E. Gotta say, in general, I did love Mike on this episode. A great character, very well written. Loved how he's not angry when he discovers there's a secret that's been hidden from him. That's pretty solid. People are allowed to have secrets. Every single series out there makes a big deal out of them. The truth is, some people out there, as opposed to what TV series usually present, are okay with other people having their own thing, their own privacy, their own secrets. So yeah, while Mike acted like a child at first, he did understand that it is possible that other people keep secrets. I did love how he wondered if the staff would have picked him, if he would have found it first, but then took it easy as well. He's now looking up to his father. His father is his role model. Like, yeah, I don't need a staff, I don't need superpowers to become a hero. matching up with Pat's phrase on last week's episode, heroes can come from anywhere. So he's thinking he could be something like Pat, someone like Pat, developing something just like Pat developed S.T.R.I.P.E. But moving on though to another funny moment on this episode, the Shining's Knight reaction to all that Rick informed him of, being "I'll go clean the bathroom." That was one of the most hilarious moments on this episode. Rick Tyler's reactions as well were pretty solid on this episode. Were pretty hilarious in two instances too. This one for one, and then there's the other one when he asks Pat if he's sure they're on the right side of things. Last though, but not least, we've got that little bit of a pop culture reference as opposed to all those other Easter eggs that we got out of the comics. The New Kids on the Block reference, Barb's computer password, which she is embarrassed to explain by the way, even though Charles McNider does explain it to Beth. So yeah, that was kind of another funny moment on this episode. Now moving away from the breakdown part and most of the Easter eggs because we still got one over here, I think the conversation between Courtney and Mike on this episode hints towards something. It's pretty much foreshadowing Mike becoming something more than just Mike Dugan. There's still a lot of equipment with Courtney that she took off the JSA headquarters and that Mike could use some of, becoming yet another superhero that could be added to this JSA team-up. It is possible that he could use the Thunderbolt, he could become the next Johnny Thunder, but more importantly, this is an Easter egg to a conversation that Mike did have with Pat on the pages of the comics. So first and foremost, it's a double Easter egg. First of all, it is about Mike discovering that Pat is S.T.R.I.P.E, and it is what leads to that second Easter egg, that conversation. Pat telling Mike that he's not going to be S.T.R.I.P.E forever or flying in S.T.R.I.P.E forever, that one day he's going to pass down this legacy to his son, to Mike, pass S.T.R.I.P.E down. But okay, that's it for this episode. One thing that I want to add over here before I end this video is another Easter egg out of last week's episode. That entire conversation between Sam and Courtney, that was right out of the comic book pages as well. Like almost word for word, the entire thing about the locket, that was out of the comic book. But that though having been said, my work here is done, so let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this week's episode. Let me know what you think is going to go down on next week's episode. How do you think the season is going to wrap up? Do you think all these villains are going to die? Do you think some of them are going to die? Do you think we're going to suffer any losses on either side in general? Let me know as well if you did like this video by dropping it one of those much appreciated likes, subscribing to this channel, and make sure while you're at it to enable notifications in order to get updates whenever I upload a new video, publish a new community post, or start a new live stream. But until the next time that you tune in for another one of my videos, thank you so much for tuning into this one, stay safe, and have a great day.